The talk by the University of Illinois President Professor Tim Killeen. I'm delighted to welcome you, Professor Killeen. He's the 20th President of the University of Illinois, and he brings more than 3 decades of experience as an educator, researcher, and an administrator. Under his leadership, the university has now 83,000 plus students across the system, which is a staggering number, and they spend nearly $1 billion in annual research funding. Um, he has, like any academic of high repute, a very impressive CV, which is going to be very difficult for me to share with you in a short time frame. But let me just tell you that he is someone who has worked at the National Science Foundation. He obviously has research experience around atmospheric research, and of course, he has a PhD in atomic and molecular physics. So he brings a big science background into a university which has a cross-cutting agenda, and therefore it is very, very interesting when someone with that background is now changing and transforming the agenda to include technology, employability, and education in the same paradigm of discussion. We at ORF are trying to do the same. And I'm going to make a small plug here. We have 2 reports on our website. One is called What Young India Wants, which is a survey of 6,700 youth in 14 cities. And it was conducted in the middle of this year. The report has been released very recently by the Minister of Skilling, Mr. Dharmendra Pradhan. And the second report is The Future of Work in India, which was a joint production with the World Economic Forum, again released by the same minister. And this surveys 774 enterprises in India, some having more than 50,000 employees, and some having as little as 5, a family-run small and medium operation. The focus of both of these exercises was to survey how the youth are embracing technology on the one hand, and how how our company is viewing the advancement of technology on the other. We came up with interesting findings, and I think Terry will discuss some of those after the talk by Professor Killeen. And finally, we will put Arvind Gupta on the spot, and post the interventions this morning, he will try and tell us how the government views these changes and what are they doing to, in many ways, link up the enthusiasm of the youth with the enterprises that are being forced to change the way they operate. And with that, let me first invite Professor Killeen to deliver the keynote this morning. Professor, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, and good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. I'm still a little jet lagged, but I'm excited to be here and to have the opportunity to talk a little bit about the perspectives that we're deriving from the University of Illinois system, which, as you know, is a big system. I'll describe a little bit of our initiatives. This is my first trip to India. I feel like in my life, India has come to me many times through my students, through colleagues, through books, literature, movies, etc. So I'm very excited to finally come to India and really to appreciate the vibrant work environment here that is very exciting to see. And of course, we're here to develop some deeper and more strategic links, which we think are very appropriate for our times. So as you all know too well, our world is at a crossroads of change, probably unlike anything in history. The development of new knowledge is being matched in pace with the development of problem sets that require solutions for human well-being. And so this is a very interesting time to live. It's an interesting time to grow up, to participate in civil society, and to generate the kind of knowledge base that the world truly needs for sustainable activities and for quality of life. And we're part of that. So breakthroughs in technology are coming at warp speed, and we need to embrace that speed of change, giving rise to a double-edged sword of boundless opportunity, but equal doses of worries and ethical issues. And it's a time when the impossible is suddenly possible, from self-driving cars to genetic editing to ward off once debilitating diseases. But at the same time, those waves of technological advances are crashing into our professional, even our personal lives, like a tsunami. So how, for instance, will our jobs in the future, or even just our fundamental roles as human beings, change in a world of rapidly evolving artificial intelligence? There's a tremendous evolution of that going on. Klaus Schwab, founder of the World Economic Forum, gave it a name, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, so I've adopted that term here. He believes it's only the fourth that our world has seen over as many centuries. First three were firmly rooted in engineering, with clear and relatively easy to grasp outcomes. Advent of steam, water power, helped usher industry into our mostly agrarian societies back in the 18th and 19th centuries. That's when the fundamentals of our institution was created in the 1860s. The idea being, it's called the land grant movement, signed by President Abraham Lincoln, that the academy has to serve society by creating human capital and skill sets, but also by participating in the economy of the day, which was agrarian. The fourth industrial revolution is a fusion of engineering and human concerns that requires comprehensive interdisciplinarity, ranging from the biophysical expertise to the social sciences, I would say through arts and humanities and ethics and social sciences. But it's impacting and often disrupting traditional institutions like ours, frankly, all disciplines, economies, and industries, and affecting people's lives on the jobs and off the job. And of course, it's what young people are growing with and in is this industrial revolution. It's natural for them, and it's less natural for some of us who've been around a while. So Dr. Schwab added advice on how to manage through the unique challenges of the fourth industrial revolution. Unlike the others, it cannot succeed by just letting the groundbreaking technologies trickle into the world. We have a finite world. There are limitations on resources and on environmental perspectives. So we need to be much more thoughtful. This revolution reaches into every corner of societies. It's going to dominate how many haves we have and how many have-nots we have in the world and the gap between those. And we need to think deeply about that. Certainly in the educational area. Leaders of government, industry, individuals, and everybody in between has to come together. He quotes that this revolution can shape a future that works for us all by putting people first, and that's an important principle. Empowering them, a second important principle, and constantly reminding ourselves that all of these new technologies are first and foremost tools made by people for people, and that's an important thing never to forget. So I'm proud to say that the University of Illinois system, which I represent here, is helping lead the way, fostering collaboration with government, industry, nonprofits, civic organizations, with academic partners around the world. And we do it with excellence and scale and integrity, and we're very excited to partner more deeply with Indian institutions. But let me give you a little bit of information about the University of Illinois. Truly a global entity, founded 150 years ago, when Urbana-Champaign opened as one of America's original land-grant universities. Since then, we've added Chicago and Springfield, and we have a total of 83,000 students, 25,000 faculty and staff, 700,000 plus living alumni around the world, including heads of state and so forth. Our universities comprise the state of Illinois' largest educational system, and we pump $17.5 billion into the Illinois economy every year. Now, to put that in context, Caterpillar, Fortune 50 company, is a $12 billion company. So we have a huge economic impact. We estimate that one out of every 46 jobs in our state is derived from the university, so we're a big employer as well as a creator of knowledge and human capital. And Illinois is a state in the United States. It's as big as the Netherlands, so we think of it as a country size. Sometimes we're not in the EU, but we think of it that scale. And of course, Chicago is one of the world's cities, and is going to be for the next 50 years, and essentially is the capital of the Midwest of the United States. And the Midwest, that region in the middle, is a third of the GDP of the country. It's maybe not as well known as the East Coast or the West Coast. There's a little Midwest modesty that certainly influences how perceptions are, but it's full of amazing institutions, fresh water, arable soil, a balanced economy, and these opportunities to really build human capital and technologies that can transform lives. We have over 700 academic programs. We graduate 22,000 students a year, many of them engineers, many of them computer engineers. So it's like a little town coming, or city coming off our product line every year. So we need to be thinking at scale. And I have a simple mind, as you probably already figured out, but for us, we want to optimize impact, not necessarily rankings or ratings or even fame. Impact is what's important for us. And impact, for me, is a product of excellence and scale. You can be very excellent and small. Think of Harvard, for example. I hope I'm not offending anybody. But you can be excellent and have large scale as well, and that's important for impact. So you multiply excellence and scale, you have impact. And then in my mind, I have a little equation, I equals E times S, but raised to the power of what we call M, magic. Because the institutional magic is the nonlinear exponent of impact. If it's less than 1, you're not having impact. But if it's 2, 3, 4, 5, and what the magic is the ability to take risks, to be collaborative, to not worry so much about the credit, to be experimental, to be not risk averse, to be fundamentally grounded in development of new knowledge and capacity, to honor integrity and knowledge and so forth. And we want to optimize our magic exponent in that equation because that'll give us the impact. Now, I am a firm believer that the magic also comes from collaboration. International collaboration is at the core. It's more important now than ever with this fourth industrial revolution. And so we're here humbly to seek guidance and opportunities to interact deeply with amazing Indian institutions. We're going to be signing 9 agreements, 9 memorandum of understandings this week. And with me are 9 other faculty members, vice presidents. We have an extensive delegation here. Many of them, as you can imagine or can perceive, are born and bred in India and are now having their professional life in the United States in the academy. And of course, we found the opposite here. We found many of the colleagues that we're meeting have also had training in the United States. So there's a fundamental alignment here that we can really take advantage of. So we believe we're a special place. We think we have a lot to offer. We have made many new businesses over the years and forged new technologies that are important for life. Netscape, Tesla, YouTube, PayPal, eBay, Pampered Chef are all companies that came out of the University of Illinois. We have 24 Nobel laureates. We have this economic impact that I've talked about and has been mentioned by Dr. Saram. Our faculty and alumni are leading pioneering discovery, including Nobel Prizes for the transistor, the LED, the first integrated circuits came out of the University of Illinois, the first educational software package came out of the University of Illinois. The first online chat room, I think we may want to take that one back, actually. But the first graphical internet browser, MRI, night vision technologies. These are the kinds of things that come out of research-intensive universities, particularly when there's an openness to diversity of ideas, backgrounds, capacities, and a willingness to work across institutional lines, international lines, et cetera. And we think that's part of the magic. That is part of the exponent. I hosted a recent meeting where we had multiple professors from Midwest universities to talk about infrastructure and the next generation of infrastructure. We can lay concrete at half the cost in half the time. It lasts twice as long. Those are amazing transformations. Every speaker in this, 20 speakers, they were all foreign born. So the United States has the blessing of being a melting pot of talent. And of course, India has made a tremendous contribution in that. We're ranked in the top 30 by Reuters in terms of the world's most innovative universities. We're partnering extensive with other innovative universities. Next week, Tel Aviv University will come to Chicago to formally declare a permanent physical presence by our side to do innovation. We're working with many other countries. We are a preferred destination for India's best or wonderful students. We have over 3,000 Indian students today studying on our campuses this fall. And as you can tell, many talented faculty members. And I'm delighted that one of them, Dr. Arvind Gupta, has joined us. We believe that you're of ours, and obviously you have a major role here, and I look forward to your comments. We have a long-standing culture of collaboration. That's also part of the magic. The ability to work across disciplines is going to be critically important for the fourth industrial revolution, because these are not easy problems. They can't be fixed by small-scale activities. They need all of the disciplines to work seamlessly together. And that's an important thing that doesn't often happen in industry, where there's a bottom line and there's a market that needs to be addressed. But public-private partnerships are going to be the major forcing function to create these technologies that the world needs to deal with the issues that are the challenges of our time, that are we term socio-technical challenges. You have the biophysical piece, water, food, air quality, et cetera, climate change, coastal cities, crime, and human welfare and health, et cetera. But they also have the social aspects. And so human decision-making, behavioral science, how people deal with risk and uncertainty and make decisions, how people collaborate across boundaries is going to be incredibly important in the next decades. The United States, for all of its renown, is only 5% of the world's population. So we in the United States have to live on our wits, and that's incredibly important. So we feel a responsibility in public higher education to really be at the cutting edge of these technologies. And if you really are at the cutting edge, really there, the forward hemisphere is black when you think about it. So there are no paths because people have not gone there before. So we're going to have to really be exuberant and courageous in exploration. There'll be many failures. We have to learn through failure as well as learn through success. So these are exciting times that we're living in. We can develop smart cars and smart highways. We can solve traffic problems. We can solve air quality problems. We know the chemistry of hydrocarbons and nitrogen oxides. We can sharply reduce the risk of accidents. We can create broadband networks essential to provide for trustworthy communications. We can do healthcare, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we need to take, which will be a major challenge, but has the promise of incredible breakthroughs in human welfare. We're looking at curing diabetes. We're close to being able to say that perhaps there's a cure for diabetes and illnesses like that, and think about how that. We're looking at revolutionizing photosynthesis rates in green cells. And we have a professor who has developed a technology of genetic editing that leads to plants that have 20% increases in their productivity. That's going to be important for the next green revolution. We need to actually grow more foodstuffs to deal with the growing population. So as this industrial revolution occurs, and of course we're living in it, so we don't recognize how revolutionary it actually is on a day-to-day basis, we have to understand the risks that are associated with this. Digital storage of personal information carries a lot of risks. It poses risks to massive attacks, cyber attacks, but even without nefarious motives, technological systems, if they're not curated with human beings, can go wrong. And when we have national weapon systems, automobiles and surgical robots, we need to worry about failure modes in technology. And there are also worries about the impact of jobs and financial equality. The challenge before us is not only to create wealth and prosperity, it's to create social equity. And if you think about it and look around the world, that has not been done many times, certainly not at the scale that's going to be needed. We cannot have a world where if you're on the have side, you're well off, but the bulk of humanity is not as fortunate. We have to find ways to create social equity. That doesn't mean everybody has the same level of prosperity, but we can't leave behind so many people. So that's a responsibility we feel in public higher education. So we need partnerships to do this, and we need to make sure that it's all the voices are at the table. We need to accelerate the fourth industrial revolution's life-changing and economy-building benefits while keeping the risks in check. Working side by side and informed by data and evidence. I'm an optimist. I believe we can do this. In fact, we have to do this. This is the challenge of our generation. And the role of institutions, particularly with that magic exponent, is essential. It's not just about survival as an institution, paying the rent, continuing. It's about contributing to society in important ways. So we're looking at the next steps, and let me end with a few comments about where we want to go and the fundamental reason that we're here in India. We think that with the progress we've had, with the standing, the legacy that we can look at, with our talent base, with our student body, our alumni body, we have a responsibility to do even more. We have a responsibility to create jobs, social equity, wealth creation through the development and deployment of technologies writ large. That requires public-private partnerships. We can't be in an ivory tower. We need to be open, open to all kinds of ideas. And so we are planning, and we're very fortunate to have received $500 million from the state of Illinois, unprecedented resource to the University of Illinois system to create a major innovation district in downtown Chicago, this world city. We have being donated land on a 62-acre parcel in downtown Chicago, where there's more bandwidth than anywhere else on the planet. So it's not just the railways, it's the bandwidth, the ability to move bits and bytes and move data around. And so we're in the process of designing that, that new innovation district or city within a world city. We want it to be open, an open innovation, so not just a club or a partnership, but there will be hundreds of recruited world-class researchers. We will be connected around the world. There'll be partner universities from around the world, including the UK, Ireland, Germany, Singapore, Taiwan, China, notably India. We'll know a lot more after this week, how actually that's going to work. Israel, Mexico, and we're looking at Jordan as well. And so we want to be a hub and spoke innovation network with a lot of flows and a lot of exchanges of students. There'll be tens of thousands of students who will benefit working side by side with small, medium, large companies in an innovation ecosystem with a lot of fluidity. There'll have to be liberal policies for intellectual property so that things can move quickly and we're targeting specific advances, and we're taking on what we feel are the most important challenges that we all face together, and our children, our grandchildren will face too. We're looking at computing data technology as basically the universal tool, and we have tremendous capacity in that. Predictive analytics, cybersecurity, machine learning, AI. We have a supercomputer system, all of those advances I mentioned before, Internet of Things. Those are the universal tools. We're looking at healthcare, including new drug development, including a pioneering new medication for shingles vaccine, HIV, AIDS vaccine, treatment medicine, wearable devices, personalized medicine, and large data activities. We're looking at food and agriculture, notably the photosynthesis. If we can enhance photosynthesis rates, works for any green plant, that's going to be part of the future of food production, but also nutrition, et cetera. And then environmental and water issues, innovations there that will protect our natural resources and provide for a growing population. This innovation agenda is not just discovery, it's partnering, leading to solutions and outcomes that make sense at scale with excellence. And it includes cross-cutting areas of society and culture, implications for changes in education and workforce development, pathways to entrepreneurship and technology transfer, and the public policy that needs to change and flow in the next decades. So we're here to seek a deep partnership with our colleagues in India. We have heard about many self-similar aspirations, and in fact, dramatic and really rapid developments of technological deployments here in India, and of course, deep capacity in these underpinning areas of software engineering, computation, device and deployments. And it's not just going to be in Chicago, and there is a direct flight from Delhi to Chicago. I was on it. It's a long flight, but it's direct, and this new facility in downtown Chicago is going to be about 35 minutes from the airport. And we want it, as I said, to be open. It's going to be connected to something we call the Illinois Innovation Network, which will be an open data-infused network that will take part of the intellectual power of our universities, not just our University of Illinois system universities, but University of Chicago, Northwestern University, the public universities in Illinois, and the partnerships that we're developing currently. We want to bring the best research faculty and interact with the best research faculty to deal with these pressing real-world problems. And frankly, if not us, who? Where are these problem sets going to flow from, if not activating the talent base? It's a reality today. We've started this effort. The $500 million from the state, unprecedented. We don't know of any state in the United States where there's been this kind of generous bipartisan allocation of funds. We've matched it already by another $300 million. So it's, if you know what Mayor Bloomberg is doing in New York City, it's that times 5 in downtown Chicago, but with an open innovation perspective, not a bilateral. So we're very excited. We know there are failure modes with everything we do in life. We don't want to go down the failure modes. There are governance failure modes. There is not invented here failure modes. There's this is mine, you can't have it failure modes. There are failure modes of not being open to new ideas and diversity, inclusion on all of its fronts. So we're determined to pioneer this kind of innovation system from the United States, the heartland of the United States, with an open innovation system, with all of these students coming through annually, 22,000, and a perspective that investments in higher education, it's not a cost center, it's a profit center. And we can show that $1 invested in public higher education returns 17% back to the tax base, which is better than any insurance policy or retirement policy that I know of. So it's not only the right thing to do, it's the pragmatically correct thing to do if you want to invest in prosperity and human welfare. But it will take all of these disciplines coming together to do that. So I'm looking forward to guidance, thoughts, comments about, and you may be thinking already that this, what is this person smoking? It sounds like too ambitious and but the times are pressing. We have historical challenges that we have to confront. We have no choice. We have to confront them, and we have to confront them in ways that don't leave people behind, that raise the quality of life, that provide for sustainability so that future generations can also prosper, and that are based on science, methodologies, quantitative research, technologies, and all of the humanities that are also important, and the social sciences. So where do you find places where all this comes into focus? Through multi-institutional collaborations. No single institution can do this. No single country can do it. Certainly no single company can do it. So we have to find new ways of really embracing the fourth industrial revolution. And that's why we're here in India. And this is day 2, I think, but we've already actually lived a lot. And I think we could even go home and declare success already, but there's more days to come. And thank you for your attention. Thank you for hearing me out. And I look forward to participating in the discussion.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Professor. Before I turn to Terry and Arvind has already prepared a roster of posers for you. But before I turn to both of them, I thought I'll take the prerogative of the chair and ask you just a couple of questions which I think are also agitating our conversations in India. The first is the nature of relationship between the innovation sector, which is technology and solutions, on the one hand, versus the development of the social sciences alongside it, ethics, philosophy, provenance. How are we defining the larger social fabric around technology that we are creating? And as an interdisciplinary institute, how strong is this connection between social sciences and innovation at Illinois University?
It has to be pivotal and fundamental. We've come through an era where it was possible to separate them in disciplines and even language and departments and so forth. And there's been an unfortunate tendency to see some of the social sciences and the humanities as like the servant of the hard sciences in a fundamental way. We want to turn that around. We actually want the people in the core, because if you're solutions oriented rather than academic paper production solution, then you have to have those social sciences at the core, not as a peripheral component. So that's why it's very exciting to see these kind of evolutions in a university setting like ours. We just put out from my office a challenge grant to our arts, humanities, and social sciences scholars. And we had an influx of proposals that are, first of all, beautifully written.
That's the advantage of social sciences.
No matter what,
versus engineers like us.
no matter what they say, I was literally tearful as I was reading these suggestions, but actually pivotal in terms. So we want to actually put it in the core. Now, has that been done effectively, properly yet? I would say no, and I would also say that from personal knowledge, this is the tale of two cities, or where you have to work hard, you have to roll your sleeves up, and you can't just bounce off each other. You have to do the hard work to actually integrate the thinking across arts, humanities, ethics, social sciences, and biophysical sciences. It's not a short-term. So you've got to stick with it. And I did a curricular development with all of those. It took us 5 years to get it right. We had weekly meetings for 5 years to get it right. So I think we need to now actually recognize that this is central to innovation into the future. Not peripheral, not an add-on, not a late thing that comes into place. And actually the problem sets have to be defined with the perspective of what people need.
And the second question I wanted to ask you before I move to Terry was on something that was recently written by a head of a think tank in UK, Chatham House. Robin had written a piece on the crisis of think tanks, where amongst other crises that many of us experience in research institutions, one of them was, of course, around funding. And is funding fundamentally organizing how we conduct our education and research, or does education and research have the same flexibility it did 100 years ago to create its own agenda? I think that tension between how do you move education and funding in a way that both add to each other rather than both getting aligned to a narrow band has remained a big challenge in our institutions.
Yeah.
How does University of Illinois, or rather the American education system, respond to this new dynamic where big money towards certain projects tends to dominate?
That's a fantastic question. I could give a whole hour on that one too. It was in the U.S. Federal agency called the National Science Foundation, where I was in charge of global change research for the United States, and I worked with international colleagues. If you just take global change research, which is research into water, air, cities, sustainability, the total is about $9 billion per year. So you'd say that's a funding level. All the federal agencies worldwide. One day, one afternoon, one event, Eastern Seaboard, $50 billion damage. So we are out of kilter, is what I'm saying. We can't expect the traditional funding mechanisms to actually support the needs that we are going to have to embrace in taking on these challenges. So there's going to be a paradigm, massive change. There will be, there has to be, because traditional methodologies of funding, and it can't be through very wealthy individuals either. It can't be through federal agencies all combined. It's going to have to be basically a restructuring of the resource base to liberate human capacity to take on these problems and solve them. It's that important. Now, can I predict how that's going to happen? No, but can I say that University of Illinois system is going to be part of it? Yes. We're going to be in a major driver's seat, because we can be a convener of talent. We can be a convener of funding from many resources. We brought in $500 million of philanthropic support just last calendar year. So we do have many loyal, dedicated alums. So there will be many components to this. But I think we need to take the bigger perspective of what the world needs, what people need, what societies need, and work through a way to take our assets in combination. And there'll be multiple strands of this funding issue. But I would say right now, we're not where we need to be.
Great. So we'll have more time to quiz the professor when we come to you. Let me turn the mic now to Terry. Terry is an associate fellow at ORF, and she's been leading a future of work initiative. She's been partnering with a number of institutions, and we've been conducting a series of seminars, workshops, and conversations around this topic, leading to the 2 reports that I mentioned. Terry, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. So I think it's no surprise that academic institutions and universities, such as the University of Illinois, have a crucial role to play as sort of the fourth industrial revolution unfolds. And I think universities, of course, are centers for refining technologies and developing new technologies, but also, as was mentioned, they're critical for helping us understand how new technologies are shaping society and sort of the economic and social and technological changes. And in addition, these academia is sort of where we're going to educate our population and prepare them for a very different world. And that's sort of the point that I will discuss today. As Dr. Saran has mentioned, we've been focusing on the fourth industrial revolution and the future of work a lot. We've just published these 2 reports. So I will discuss a little bit about the sort of education dynamic and sort of how we prepare our youth and our existing workforce for the future of work. So there's 2 points that I would like to sort of discuss. And the first is this, that the fourth industrial revolution in India is being realized sort of on shop floors. It's not a grand plan. So that is that factories, for example, that we've sort of seen through our research, are introducing technologies and solutions and introducing technologies that are related to the fourth industrial revolution to existing processes. So rather than designing, for example, a smart factory and then building that, actually these innovations are happening at a much more incremental pace and process. And I think this is in contrast to sort of our collective imagination about how the fourth industrial revolution is sort of unfolding and what smart factories look like. We sort of imagine that there's a big plan, there's a blueprint, and then we can sort of build these. But in reality, in India, that's sort of not how it's playing out. And importantly, the change and innovation that we're seeing is happening at all levels within firms. And it's not just top-down solutions, but I think what's important is that these processes are happening at the shop floor level. So lower skilled workers are also sort of innovating and finding ways of optimizing processes and existing processes. And I think that this sort of incremental nature and this sort of lower skilled level at which change is happening has important implications for the way that we design our education and skilling initiatives for the fourth industrial revolution. So that sort of brings me to the second point, which is that the theoretical and the practical divides that we use for designing skilling and education programs are sort of not serving our purpose. So that is, we have divides between education and skilling, between high-skilled and low-skilled, between knowledge workers and between manual workers. And I think in reality, what we're seeing is that these aren't serving what we need because it's also the low-skilled workers who are implementing and ideating about the technologies and potential innovations within firms. So I think that skilling programs in India tend to focus primarily on providing people with job-specific skills to help people attain employment in the short term. But I think the challenge with this is that skills requirements are changing much more rapidly than we would expect, and skilling programs have a difficult time sort of keeping pace with those changes. And secondly, skilling initiatives tend to neglect sort of other softer skills that are increasingly in demand, things like, problem solving, creativity, communications. So I think the fourth industrial revolution is emerging both from the bottom and from the top in India, and change is happening within existing contexts, and it's happening incrementally. So the education and skilling systems that we create to support this process must also account for this. And the stringent divides kind of that we've created in the institutions that we use to support people, support their education and skilling, might not be best suited for the realities and the ways that innovation is happening. And I think as we sort of move forward, policies and approaches need to allow for greater collaboration, as was mentioned, for the emergence of a fourth industrial revolution that would enable sort of greater social equity. So that's all.
Presenting you the full reports, Professor, before you leave, because when you come here, we only produce publications, unfortunately, so you'll be getting those. Netscape is produced by Arvind Gupta, one of the companies you mentioned.
Yeah,
So Arvind,
I
let me
know.
turn it over to you. And I think you have a series of thoughts and provocations.
I have first a question to Professor Killeen. And thank you, Sameer, and thank you, Terry, for leading this so far. But you so easily mentioned about and I'm biased towards the statement I'm going to make, but I want you to clarify for all of us. I'm biased because I benefited from the interdisciplinary work at UFI. But it's so easy for you to mention the kind of interdisciplinary thoughts and vision you have. I'm just wondering, given the fourth industrial revolution, which is all about interdisciplinary research and putting that research to work on the ground, what kind of cultural, what kind of internal mindsets do you require that the university can offer as advice to others, for example, in India? Because it's easier said than done. I mean, two departments don't talk to each other. Here you're talking about multitude of departments, engineering, health, ethics, legal aspects, societal aspects. So at least 4 or 5 people always working together to produce output. So what is the secret sauce that UFI has developed so far that I think you're going to put to use at Discovery? So that's my first question, because that requires a different input, a different melting pot, and a different output coming out of it.
Yeah. You're exactly right. It's the phrase interdisciplinary research rolls off the tongue so easily. It's as if it's just trivial to do. I'm very proud of the University of Illinois system for many reasons, but one of the reasons is that it was very early in actually walking the walk on interdisciplinary research. We have what we call institutes that were created 40 years ago, before this became a buzz phrase, and worked through 40 years ago the kind of credit, who gets what, and how do you get your careers advanced. And so there's some practical issues about how careers are advanced that need to be resolved. And so it became, and you used the word culture, it became a dominant culture that you could have your cake and eat it too. You could have your position in a department, mechanical engineering, metallurgy, whatever it was, but you could also participate in interdisciplinary research. The institution has to allow that. It has to be a breathing mode. It has to be natural. It can't be forced, and it has to be, so it has to actually sit well, particularly with younger researchers. It's got to sit well with them. So the culture has to be in place for this to work. You can sort of do a top-down, there shall be an interdisciplinary institute, and the shockwave goes through everything, and everybody says, well, how am I going to get tenure, or how am I going to get recruited, or et cetera. And so institutes like ours that have learned how to do this over decades have a special advantage. And you've seen it, and you participated in it, and you know the institutes I'm talking about. We now want to go to the next level, which is a higher level of organization that is more intentional, more open bandwidth, more partnerships. So it's not just an institution working, but taking that culture and deploying it out. And I have to say, as an immigrant to the United States from Europe, United States has the ability to, despite some things in our public policy that we're all concerned about, it does actually have the ability to open the horizons that people can see and are allowed to connect. And so the culture exists. I think that culture is centrally important more now than ever. to deploy it. And you homed in on one of the biggest challenges of all. How do you put the social sciences in the mix rather than as sort of an outcome that is peripheral? So I'm an optimist. I think we can do it. We can exemplify it. We would love to do it with Indian institutions at a scale that has never been done before. This is our aspirations are beyond what's been achieved before. When people ask us, what's the model for this? Sometimes I say, facilely, Singapore and Chicago, because Singapore did go through it dramatic, but it's not really that. It's really knowledge creation and dissemination at the scale that history demands. So we need to recognize that we have a culture, that it's of value. It needs to sit well in professional lives. We can't have bureaucratic obstacles. So it's part of my job is to make sure that this stovepiping isn't the dominant thing. But it has to be what I call light matrix. It can't be heavy matrix where everything is stovepiped, and it can't be no matrix where everything's top down. You have to have your cake and eat it too. You've got to be quantitative and disciplined and deep in one area and be able to, and now I find that younger people love it. They love that. It's just natural for younger people. They're not acculturated to you have to wait in line to get, in this autocratic system to even get to first base. So I think we have that advantage too, that this next generation of technology natives, digital natives, really kind of expect it in a fundamental way. So U of I think, will be a special place to do it. And I can compare and contrast with other universities that I've been involved in other states. And I think we do actually have the special sauce. We do.
So Arvind, you've passed the question over to the professor. I actually wanted to ask you, sitting in MyGov, sitting as part of the government's team that is looking at technology, that is seeing potential as well as disruptions that are unfolding due to technology. How are you responding to this opportunity in government?
Yeah, I think couple of things, Samir. Thank you. Number one, India is very serious, and you've seen the commitment from all of center and state leadership. For an example, it was only less than 6 weeks ago that the Prime Minister launched the Fourth Industrial Revolution with the World Economic Forum Center in India. So we are one of the 3 centers in the world which does work on the Fourth Industrial Revolution exclusively from a lens of India. So in collaboration with World Economic Forum. So there is a agility in policy around that because Fourth Industrial Revolution is not only about the way it is viewed, is not only about putting interdisciplinary systems in place, solving societal problems, but also aiding it with agile policy making. And I think while we are discussing the issues of ethics and weaponization, India has been very progressive in terms of putting a lot of policy enablers rather than disablers. Less regulation, but light policy making. And the Fourth Industrial Revolution in India is looking at the 4th IR centers, and the problems that we are looking at are something that is very relevant to what you said, Prof Killeen, is around the bottom of the pyramid. If we can solve the problems at the bottom of the pyramid, you can solve a lot of other problems. We achieved that in fintech, for example, in banking and financial inclusion. If you could promise a bank to the poorest of the poor in India and make it operationally and viably feasible for them to operate that, then anybody else could be given a banking solution. And today, banking, credit, everything is available to everybody in India. It's like banking a billion. And with that approach, we are now targeting things around health. Health is a very big sector, looking at disruption, using both technology and defrogging multiple generations of how health needs to be, both preventive and prescriptive health and operative health issues need to be solved. Also about both physical and digital infrastructure around health. What new systems, what new engineering needs to be put in, what new devices need to come in, for solving the problems of health in India. We are about 1 million doctors short. We are going to remain 1 million doctors short in India. But how do we still overcome that using new technologies, new approach to solving the problem of health? Food and agriculture. I mean, there is, software. Another colleague of mine, who's globally famous, who was the founder of Netscape, Mark Anderson, did make a statement: "Software eats everything." So somebody sitting right next to him on the panel said, "It still is not producing food." So you need it. It can optimize how more production or how better agriculture is done, but you still need food in agriculture. So a lot of research, a lot of things are being done in making sure that the food chain, the food value chain, is being optimized. We have an aggressive target of doubling the farmer's income, and that won't happen just by one intervention. It's a multi-pronged intervention, and two other areas which are critical problems in cities is the sustainable cities. While we're building cities, the Singapores are being built, but India is adding a Chicago every year in terms of urban population. So that's the kind of load we have on our cities. So keeping that load in mind, we have to reinvent and rethink our cities and the sustainable cities. So the imperatives, you talked about what are the imperatives. The imperatives are going forward. Some problems have been, I considered, checkmarked in terms of solved by both public and private participation. Banking and financial inclusion has been one. Building the backbone, the pipelines, the plumbing for this delivery infrastructure for India, the government infrastructure. But the problems that are new are remaining to be solved is health, food and agriculture, sustainable cities, and of course, India is leading the new debate on environment. Globally, actually, the COP21 initiative, India has been a leader. So, whether what are the global objectives around environment and sustainable environment matches with the cities, but what do we do in that? So, those are the kind of priorities we have when you think of fourth industrial revolution vis-a-vis India. Now, in all of this, we didn't discuss technology. Correct. Because that we believe is the baseline. I mean, whether it's going to be AI-driven, IoT-driven, 5G, and whatever else it may be, big data. Those are all the horizontal that will disrupt and serve any of these societal issues. So, what are the things that we're thinking? Areas we're thinking, but more importantly, it's all a bottom-up approach. It's not thinking from a lens which is top-down, but thinking at the poorest of the poor, the last man or woman or family in the queue, and whether it will solve their problems. And that's an approach that has worked, for example, in health insurance. It's worked in the case of banking and financial inclusion in terms of direct benefits transfer, providing energy to every household. India has a very aggressive target of providing electricity to every household by the end of the year. So there are many such things where it has worked at scale. We just hope to take it forward.
And Arvind famously says that the Americans solve problems for $500 million, the Chinese for the next billion. India has to solve for the six billion who are remaining.
Yes.
So that's how it. But
thank you, Samir, for saying that. Yeah.
But before I open it up and I can see some hands, let me ask you one more difficult question, all three of you. But I'll start with Terry now. Terry, your report also sheds some light on the big challenge facing the fourth industrial revolution, which is around gender. Can you give us some numbers around that? And then I'll quiz the professor on what is Illinois doing to respond to that gender poser for the fourth IR, and then what Arvind thinks the government can do. Terry.
So I think there's two things. So the big number that we have in India is that only 27% of women are in the workforce, in the paid workforce. And I think there's kind of an assumption that technologies are going to lead to an increase in women's economic participation, whether that's through being connected through digital platforms or whatever. But our research has revealed something else. We found that technology has in fact not led to an increase in women's economic participation. And the firms that we've talked with, which was more than 700 companies across India, don't have plans to bring more women into their companies in the next 5 years. So it's not on the agenda for many companies. So I think in a very short way, that's kind of what the challenge in India looks like.
And skilling?
And in terms of skilling, I mean, of course, so we, when we surveyed 5,000 youth, we asked them, what is your interest level in terms of participating in skills development programs? What we found is that women's ambitions were even more, higher than men's. I think it was something like 80% of female respondents wanted to participate in some kind of program. And also their academic ambitions were also more significant. More of them wanted to do PhDs, master's programs, etc. But they also reported greater barriers in actually pursuing those programs, both academic and skills. So I think, ambitions are obviously there. The same with work. Women want to work, they want full-time jobs. But the opportunities and sort of the business side is not in place yet.
So we have teased half of the sky, half of the population has been now brought to that stage where they have aspirations, ambitions, they see this as a big moment. Companies are not ready to accept them. Enrollment rates and fruition of skilling ambitions and education ambitions are lower for women than men in India. But this is a secular trend across the world. I mean, certain countries are doing better than us, but in relative terms, women seem to be lagging other than in a few islands called the Scandinavian countries. But generally, I think we are struggling with providing equitable opportunities, and both in terms of the education systems and employment. University of Illinois.
Well, my comments, I completely acknowledge this. Often I see, you have to identify the problem and work towards solving it. This one is, in a way, an opportunity. We've sort of artificially depressed half of the world's populations from full participation in designing society and moving forward and economic participation, as you pointed out. Let's liberate that. Let's fix that problem. Institutions have to work on that. We're working on it. Our gender representation in our engineering colleges, which are very prestigious, is getting to parity. It's not quite there yet. We have issues at higher levels of administration, but we're working on that. We're working through that. Our applicants to University of Illinois are nicely balanced. We have more female applicants than male applicants, and they tend to be actually a little bit better qualified. So we're doing our part, but I think India can lead the world in this regard, and I think it's an opportunity to really just liberate, just open that door, and it's got to be, again, a culture shift. It's got to be an acceptance. It's got to be pay equity and issues like that, advancement capacities. It's I was, for a little while, I chaired a committee looking at Qatar, the state of Qatar's science and program. I was the chair of a committee for science and technology research for the Qatar Foundation, and I realized very quickly that the females in Qatar were working so hard and they couldn't travel, or they weren't traveling that much. And so I set up a subcommittee, what we called the National Treasure Subcommittee. It's the national treasure, was this female competence and willingness to work and engage, et cetera, that if liberated could really just be a huge step forward. So I think this is one of the problems that absolutely needs, and not just for moral and ethical grounds, but for pragmatic, practical advancement grounds. So we're working hard on it. We're not in the same kind of situation, I don't think, that India is. And we would like to take this problem on because full gender parity representation in society is the clearest indicator of human welfare and prosperity that there is. So just from pragmatic reasons, we have to crack this. And we'll work with you from our perspectives on this.
I think there has been I mean, while it's going to take, it's not an annual problem to be solved. It's a longer term thing that we need to achieve. But I think one thing I can say with confidence is that in India, it's become a women, not a development of women, but women-led development. Even that changing that little bit signifies a lot. That it's how can you use, not just look at developing and making sure it's just an issue about gender, but completely changing the paradigm of a women-led development. I'll give you some examples. And as I said, this is work in progress. A lot more needs to be done. We talked about the financial inclusion. In banking, we realized that when we launched, the Prime Minister launched the Prime Minister Jan Dhan Yojana, the highest number of non-bank population was women. Today, they were the first one to embrace once given that opportunity. And today we have 100% banking at a household level, 100 million plus accounts at a household level, a unique account. So that's the thing. If you ensure that it's a women-led development, it does. The acceptance is
What
very
about
fast.
in the startup sector and the tech
I'm coming to both the sectors. So one thing, on the startup side, the mudra loans, if you see, the self-employment, 73% of the mudra loans are to women.
40% of the startups are from women.
Yes, and that is the last point. In fact, tomorrow there is a women entrepreneurship program that the Niti Aayog is concluding to give special awards to women entrepreneurs. 3,800 applicants in that category. Not just it's the category. It's only for women.
It's only for women.
But 3,800 people applied. 3,800 people applied. So the point being, I think there is a shift. Is it enough?
No.
No, it's a power of 51. It's still 40%. It should be 50% at least. So it's a progress in the right direction.
Okay. Great. Let's open it. Sir, you want to comment?
I think this is a leadership question. I think this requires intervention. It's not something that will resolve itself, happen automatically. And so, awards, senior positions, recruitment, every step along the way
Have to
has
have
to
an
be, there has to be, and if it's not working, there has to be an active intervention.
Great. So, yes, why don't you come to the chair here and ask a question, but go ahead, sir.
Thank you. My name is Goel. I'm a retired diplomat professional. Now, my question, in fact, the fourth industrial revolution, two issues which agitate my mind are true, really. One is that every industrial transition has brought with it significant disruptions in the society. Dr. Gupta mentioned it. Now, what kind of disruptions do you expect in this fourth revolution? Disparities is one thing, growing disparities amongst populations, not just sections of population, but huge populations. And I would imagine that the growing migration could be one consequence of this kind of a change. So what I want to know is what kind of disruptions do you expect and how should they be addressed? Number one. Number two, as a diplomat, I really look at things in intergovernmental context. Now, technologies are a very sensitive issue, and very often the latest ones are not accessible on one ground or the other.
Export controls.
So here, what kind of prospect do you see for the intergovernmental collaboration on the emerging new technologies like artificial intelligence? I have China in mind, which actually is growing so fast that it's challenging the USA. Thank you.
I think that's a valid question. You have seen industrial revolutions create wars and conflicts, other kind of disruptions, and I think that's one first part. And the second is who, like Arvind says, who owns the IP or export controls that have accompanied invention in the past centuries. And I think we have to think about how we create a public good approach to innovation.
Absolutely.
I think that's the challenge. That how is it serving the 6 billion and not only the top half a billion? Do you want to both? Should we collect another one? Yeah, please.
Hi, my name is Rajiv Saxena. I'm an ex-graduate from the University of British Columbia, sir. And I have taken, way back in 1980, multidisciplinary courses, what you mentioned. The second aspect is I retired as the senior most officer of NIC. I know Arvind very well, and many of my applications have now reached into the product stage and they are being implemented abroad. I'll talk to you, Arvind. My question is, sir, the latest trend among the industry is many of these big companies like Oracle, Microsoft, IBM, they are creating their own universities. How do you accept them to be competing with the traditional Stanford or any other Ivy League university? And let me, for the mention of the others, the next stage of the industrial revolution and the second part, what Arvind talked about, the health, is being led by a lady. The Secretary of the Health is a lady, and the lady who has, and another lady has actually chalked out the entire health mission in the government of India, sir. I'm an ex-bureaucrat too. Thank you.
No, so let me problematize this question further. Is traditional education sustainable? let me ask you that question itself. If we are moving towards an era where your smartphone is your access to information, then all you require is ability to process information into knowledge. And so are we looking at a very different form of education going ahead, where you see niche institutions providing niche skills to do niche activities. And I think with these two questions, let's answer these two, and then we'll
Just summarize, one is a whole issue about traditional education, and other is a cross-border open innovation in that sense.
correct. So do you want to go ahead, sir?
Yeah, it's interesting. Let me start with the disruptions expected question, maybe. I think that's an interesting way to pose it, because each of the previous industrial revolutions it's taken 50 years to integrate a new energy system, et cetera. But I think this is a different time, because we're on the path to management by crisis today. We're on a path for disruption just with the status quo. Just we continue with the status quo. If you can't breathe, nothing else matters. And there's not water to drink, nothing else matters. So we are in the process of going into disruption space significantly. And we know it because we've now got the knowledge that we can predict, we can simulate, we can do scenario planning, and we know enough. And that's what I meant by the knowledge creation, crossing over with the need for that knowledge in our lifetimes. If you think about that, we could have had this knowledge 200 years ago, we wouldn't have the issues that we're dealing with now, or we could have waited another 200 years, in which case we would have really hit so the knowledge is emerging at the time that we're recognizing that we're entering into catastrophic disruption space. So it's almost like the opposite of what you're saying. What disruption? No, we're going to expect disruptions. There are going to be lost jobs, many truck driver jobs. They're going to disappear. There's going to be a huge wave of the work week is going to change. I think it touches on credentials and the role of education is going to go through a major disruption. I don't think the current models are sustainable, either financially or in terms of access or affordability. We need to make sure that's the case. I think there will be adjustments. Some of them will be evolutionary. Some of them will be just, revolutionary changes. So we can talk about stock market worries and what I'm going to do for retirement, but boom, we're facing disruption today, and we need to take our knowledge and actually activate solutions to avoid some of those disruptions. So it's a very complex family of issues, but this is on our watch now. It's our generation, whether you're retired or not. It's on our lifetime watch to do this, and we owe it to the next generations to make the first best steps to create this equitable family of outcomes. Gender, we have to solve that problem in order to make progress. So I would, again, I would always take the converse of questions. What disruptions can we expect? Yeah, some companies will go out of business. I think on the globalization, lack of globalization, we're looking at massive disruptions there. You're already seeing it. The whole area of immigration is becoming a hot potato, and a lot of, frankly, ignorant thinking about the role of passages of people across boundaries. There are pulls and there are pushes. There are economic pushes. That's going to be very disruptive. We're entering that reference frame. And when water becomes scarce, then there will be conflicts that needed to be avoided. So I would, rather than say what disruptions are expected, I would say what disruptions can we avoid with our knowledge base, and take that responsibility on hand. I think it comes into the other question about the educational mission, because we need to rethink that. Now, we have some models. Human institutions exist for three purposes, right? Stability, avoiding harm, and creating progress. Okay, many of our institutions have focused on the stability. Let's keep going, let's maintain, when the world changes around you, so we need to refocus our efforts in institutions on creating good and being very intentional, and that's going to transform education. We're leaving too many people behind. That's a problem. We can't continue to do that. Society will come apart if we have an elite that's well supported and the bulk of humanity is cut adrift. That's not survivable, let alone moral or supportable. So I do think this fourth industrial revolution, and it says harnessing academy and industry. I think it's not just academy and industry, it's all human beings and all governments and all thinking, sentient, intellectual people who can come together to talk about this. And I think that's an exciting time to live. And it's a responsibility to solve these problems. But they're coming at us faster and faster and faster, and the technological advances are occurring faster and faster. So it's a race. It is a race.
Are you frightened of it?
I'm an inherent optimist, but I've been testifying to Congress about climate and doing things and involved in IPCCs for 30 years, and I'm alarmed that we've got to where we are today with the knowledge base that we actually have. If the humans on the planet don't respect the resources and the limited resources of the planet, then we have a problem that, and again, it could be a crisis by crisis by crisis set of interventions. They'll come at us no matter what, but if we can bring thoughtful approaches, and education is inherent, the key component of that. It's the most important component of that. There's nothing more noble than a profession in education today. Nothing more noble and honorable in my mind. Of course, I voted with my feet, but I think that's where we will, and these young people coming through, we have to trust them. They're digital natives, they are exuberant, they're entrepreneurial. We need to make sure the bureaucratic obstacles are removed from there. And we need to instill in them the ethical, moral compass that's going to be needed to, and we need to call out voices that are antagonistic to that. So there will be other political disruptions as well that we're already starting to experience. Yeah. I'm not sure if that answers both of the questions, but.
There are lots of young people in this room. You can also ask for scholarships and admissions, but you can also ask him a question. So this is the opportunity. But I think while I go for the next round, you kind of sidestep the question around open innovation. I think that's the second part he had asked. You are part of Illinois network, but at the end, the question is who owns the intellectual property and how much does it cost to embed a solution in a society? I think that's the key question in terms of dispersal and deployment.
It's the $9 billion versus $50 billion question. I mean, you spend $9 billion in research, but one catastrophe costs you $50 billion. So I think this, in my opinion, we've been championing open innovation in India. I think this holding on to you and you own this while everything else around you is disrupting. I think there is a fundamental shift, at least from a societal perspective, of creating open innovation, open stacks, and people can build on top of it. Of course, you need entrepreneurship, and you need to recognize entrepreneurship and IP and everything else. So, but there are certain things that have to go. You have to create the roads, and then you can create a Tesla or you can create a Volkswagen, and those are businesses that will run. But the road will always become, it's a public good. Same thing should happen with fundamentals in open innovation.
I'm all for open innovation. I think that's important. I think our value proposition is going to change. It's going to be forced to change. It can't be about the dollar or the rupee, bottom line only. It's got to be about the avoidance of harm or the creation of human welfare. That we have to quantify that. We have to have much more sophisticated metrics for human endeavors that are not just about the wealth creation for the few, but for participation in civil society for the many. And I think that needs to be exemplified and modeled in institutions like ours, where so that means liberal IP policies, means sharing, it means expansive perspectives of the role and how the benefits are managed. But I do think we're going to need to have a different model, a more sophisticated, dollars are proxies for advancement, no question about that. So, in the first wave, it's important to optimize around something, a figure of merit like that. But we're going to have figures of merit that are more sophisticated into the future. That's where the social sciences have to actually lead that charge. What are we going to put instead of the dollar in terms of a figure of merit to reference? And that is an urgent question. I think a very urgent question, because you could be forced into a local minimum that does not serve society.
The dollar must be a figure of merit, not the only figure of merit.
Exactly.
I think that's a great point. Terry, your research also shed some light on the questions around not only gender, but also around the education system itself. And there was a question asked on the future of education and skilling, and you saw a counterintuitive response from some people still seeking the old, right? I mean, what did the survey show?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's kind of unsurprising what we found actually is that, I mean, at least among the youth that we surveyed, the vast majority of them still want higher education. But at the same time, there was a surprising share of youth who also want skilling and other
In addition.
types of, yeah, in addition to a higher degree. So, I mean, I think there's an openness and sort of an awareness among youth that the traditional education model is necessary, one, for social prestige, for getting the job that you want. But I think also there's sort of an increasing awareness about needing new kinds of skills, either to be employable or, I mean, for your own sort of interest. But I think the traditional education model is still the predominant sort of preference for youth, and I don't think that will change soon.
Great. So any interventions, yes, please.
use
Just come here, come to the top of the table and sit here and ask. And you get to take that pencil box back with you, since you were sitting there last, sorry.
I'm from the field of corporate finance and investment banking, retired now, and want to do my little bit for society. But so I've had occasion to go through the ILO report 2019 and the WDR. What I see is governments are sitting on a minefield of problems, and they are not addressing it. This fourth industrial revolution and harnessing academia and industry to create solutions is preaching to the converted. We are all aware of the crises, the increased joblessness that's happening across the globe, the march of technology, AI. How do we harness the government? I mean, they are facing everybody in vulnerable employment is going to be even more so. You see a spread of anarchy across, and yet you have to deal with everybody at the bottom of the pyramid. No government in any part of the world is dealing with this. And of course, when you keep people partly employed in the emerging gig economy, you have to still give them retooling, skilling facilities so that they feel empowered, that they're giving their little bit to society. Otherwise, they'll get converted into some other radical, non-anarchist movement, which is essentially the base of all unrest. How do we harness governments?
So,
I'm turning the whole table around. No, I think that's a valid question because, there are two dimensions to this question. She has actually posed two questions here. The first is that in certain parts of the world, we have reached an easy conclusion that markets are the best determinants of progress, which means markets will find jobs, markets will find health, markets will discover education systems, etc., etc., etc. And Illinois happens to be located in a country which has reached that conclusion. In other parts of the world, we have reached the happy conclusion that governments will provide us everything. Governments will give us education, governments will give us homes, government will give us jobs. There are two systems at work. Both are rearing their heads again quite vigorously. And in many sense, between a universal basic income and a socialist economy, we are starting to find that sensible solutions elude us. And real questions around employment, around equity, around redistribution are victims of either a market-based determination or a purely government-led determination. So how do we create that middle ground or that median where government harnessing academia, government and industry to create solutions becomes the modus operandi? I think that's the question.
Thank you so much. That's exactly what I was asking. And I mean, I've worked in corporate finance, and my name is Mekhala. So.
with your indulgence, may I give a little story to try to
Please,
answer
please.
from my, I'm not the expert on government processes, but I do have I was in government, and it was at the time of these big crises in, costly environmental disasters. So we convened the agencies from about 20 countries. The executives of the global change research in China, Australia, Canada, France, Germany, the UK, South Africa, Brazil, and India, and many others. And we came around a table. These are the government representatives who are the leading funders of research, and I was chairing it in my then role. This is just a few years ago. We shared our strategic plans on a password-protected website, and we went through all the strategic plans. They were so common. They were so common. It was freshwater security, coastal vulnerability, smart cities, it's amazing how much in common the family was. So when we met in this place called the Belmont House, we decided we were going to work together. So then we went to the State Department. It takes 2 years to get an international treaty. So let's do a coalition of the willing. Let's get, let's Brazilian dollars spent in Brazil, Indian dollars in India, but let's work together. That became extremely successful, and it's going on today. And all of these international research things, and it's a very short story, but at the funding event that we had, where we had all the executives sitting around from government addressing issues of coastal vulnerability, seawater, sea level rise, etc., it was time to fund a common effort. And India put the first 2 million euros in. India did, and the rest of us from the northern, global north, thinking, then South Africa next, and then Brazil. The global south led the way. There's a role of the global south in government to lead the way. And half an hour passed, we had 26 million euros. We put out a call, international call. We had scientists and technologists from 140 countries propose. I didn't even know there were 140 countries in the world, but they proposed. There's an example of people in government collaborating, with a way forward, signing MOUs, etc. And so governments can lead the way with appropriate leadership and willingness to collaborate and the time taken to interact. I think this country first, that country first militates against all of that. But I think I'm an optimist again. I think these problems are so front and central that we're going to be forced to global families of solutions. And there are amazing people in government, amazing intellectuals. I mean, 4 of the Chinese vice premiers are engineering PhD level people. They know. They have, quantitative tools at their disposal. So I'm an optimist about this, but our bodies, our UN organizations are a little too stiff and too slow to do it through treaty operations. And again, this onrushing family of problems is going to force a whole new cadence to do this. It's going to come down to leadership, though. And this next generation, I'm looking at some young people in the audience. There's going to be a lot on your watch, too. We've got our own challenges on our watch. But I think the next generation is going to be really driving forward on these issues. So I'm not sure if that answers your question. Gives you a little...
It does partly. Thank
But
you.
that was very philosophical, very much like an Indian response. So I think that's a good note to. It's a positive one.
Approach.
So-
You can appeal to humanity.
You have to appeal to individuals for leadership. You have to demand leadership. You have to call out intransigent, ignorant directions. Democracy has to work. People have to show up and vote. I took zucchini bread to all the students waiting to vote just recently, and my wife and I handed out zucchini bread to all those young people who are voting for the first time. There has to be that too. And education plays an important role in all of those things. So deeply optimistic, recognizing problems. Let's take them on.
I think this is a great
you.
point to conclude the morning conversation, but I think your last intervention sums it up in many ways. I think we must all, in government and outside government, come to the realization and conclusion that the challenges of the world are too big to be fixed by a Westphalian system created for different times. I think to rely on any single institution or set of actors to solve key posers that technology, the planet, and the people are throwing up themselves at all of us all the time is now naive. I think a new collective needs to be created, which is transnational, which is community-led, which is a people-first model. It doesn't mean that it is against business. It just means that business is a part of that same collective. It is not against governments. It is that governments are part of that same collective. It is also not necessarily exclusionary around diversity. It is that it is a diverse collective. And I think if we can create this new collective, we can build a new, agreement, a social contract for the fourth industrial revolution, where payments, protection, and purpose, the three words that Terry is sick of hearing from my mouth, payments, purpose, and protection. If we can deliver this to people in ways which are sustainable for the planet, that social contract needs to be discovered, and it is not going to be discovered by historians and political scientists and economists, nor is it going to be discovered by coders in Bangalore and Silicon Valley. It needs to be a conversation amongst people. It needs to be a conversation within this collective that comes up with this new model. This model cannot be rigid. It needs to be nimble. So what works in India may not work in the United States of America. So these are multiple social contracts which are agile, nimble, flexible, changing with time, responding to change. And if we can eventually create education and skilling systems that allow all of us to participate in these new contracts, which, by the way, may never be codified, which will never be in written constitutions, which will be more imagined and in operation rather than in any rigid framework, is what we will need to discover together. We at ORF would be delighted to work with you and your project as it unfolds. We host two big technology and society conferences, one in Delhi and one in Morocco. We think it's time that Africa has to be center stage in any conversation. We don't want to, as a leading emerging power, we don't want to be guilty of the same sins where we have conversations in a closed group. We want the tent to be much wider, much bigger, and to include people at the time when the design is being discovered. And that is why at ORF, we believe Africa is a continent where we will invest the most in. In many ways, we also want to be the incubator where Silicon Valley can meet Nigeria, Silicon Valley can discover North Africa and South Africa. We want to invest in doing that. And we would love to partner with you in any project, in any form, maybe sign the 10th MOU during your visit here. You mentioned 9, but count on us. And we hope to have Illinois as a partner in many of our initiatives. We will be sending you invitations to our initiatives in these continents, that places that I mentioned. And so thank you very much.
So can I just say, fantastic. I hope that was taped, because what you just said nailed it. The only change, I would say, Silicon Valley out, University of Illinois in.
Yes.
That's the only change.
Done. We'll do that. But before you go, you have to carry back a bit of a load to Illinois.
Still has not got his bag, so.
Oh, good. Then you can carry it. I'm giving you a bag as well. Here, this is an ORF
That's
bag.
kind of you. Thank you.
And this has 2 of our reports that Terry led and authored.
Thank you so much.
With some others. And a small memento
Oh, thank you so much.
for your table. And Arvind, this is your first visit here in your official capacity.
Yes.
So I can give you this as well.
Thank you very much. And we just have a little token, just a strategic plan, a new institute, and to remind you that we're there, and we'll be the new Silicon Valley.
Thank you.
Ohio Valley.
Thank you so much. Lunch is served.